Good evening and welcome to the February 15th, 2022 meeting of Public Works. Due to the pandemic, all committee members are participating virtually. For virtual meetings, committee members will be muted until asked to be heard. When there is a vote, a roll call will be conducted. A committee member will be recognized, raise their hand, and state their vote. Committee members are Councilmember Barbara Haynes Burke, Vice Chair, Councilmember John Larson, Councilmember Annette Scipio, and myself, Councilmember McIntosh. All right, I'm hoping that we're going to keep in the spirit of the evening and be very brief tonight. We have a short docket. Are there any items on the consent agenda that committee members or other council members would like to have pulled?
C3, please.
Okay, any others? Okay, could I get a motion to approve the balance?
So, second.
I have a motion and a second. City Clerk, can we get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Burke.
Yes.
Councilmember Larson.
Yes.
Councilmember Scipio.
Yes.
Councilmember McIntosh.
Aye. And now, if Clerk would please read item C3.
Item C3, resolution authorizing the conveyance of an easement to Duke Energy Carolinas LLC.
Councilmember Scipio, do you have specific questions or are you looking for a presentation?
Actually, I have a specific question and I would like for the public to see what we're talking about. But I'll just ask my specific questions and then Mr. King can sort of show us what we're doing. Just sometimes I think the community needs to understand various kinds of activities that we undertake. And one happens to deal with easements. And so I would like an explanation of what do easements allow? That's number one. Do we get any money when we grant an easement? And if residents grant an easement, do they oftentimes get money? And does an easement prevent later development on that site? So those are my main questions. I'd just like to have a little understanding for all of us and the public. And so if Mr. King can show us what this where this easement is.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair McIntosh and council members. I will share my screen here real briefly. I'm going to chime in on a little bit of this, and then I'm going to let Robert Presswood talk a little bit about this. So hopefully, are folks able to see the screen there?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So we're up on the North Liberty Street intersection there near North Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. And really the piece of property that's in question is the one right here that you can see highlighted in blue. That's a city-owned parcel. And if you're looking at the maps in your packet, the need is really to get an upgraded power service to this building here. And so the idea is to grant an easement along basically the back portion of the city-owned lot, which then gets you back over into the power supply here that's in the right-of-way. So Councilmember Scipio, to your comment, easements are basically a grant for a specific use of property. So we don't actually transfer title to that property to Duke Energy. We basically grant a specific use, and that specific use in this case is for the need to get power. So we come to this committee oftentimes with an easement for stormwater, for drainage, for parking. There's various types of easements. Easements prescribe the specific intended use of that piece of property. In terms of development restrictions, so it does encumber, you know, depending on the type of easement and what it's for, it does place an encumbrance on a piece of property and perhaps restrict some development that can occur within wherever that easement is located. I'll let Robert speak a little bit to this one and kind of how the compensation works on the city end versus private property. Robert's got a lot of experience in that area, so I'll let Robert chime in on that piece as well.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Good evening.
As far as the compensation, it varies depending on what's going on, but because this easement is actually to provide power to a building itself, we are not asking for compensation from Duke Energy in this case. As far as citizens and their compensation. Typically, if the easement that Duke is needing is to provide power to those citizens, there's usually not a compensation involved in that. Now, if Duke Energy is needing the property to put in a transmission line or something like that, there is usually compensation involved in that.
If I could chime in here, the issue of compensation basically relates to what's the value of what you're giving up and what's the value of what you're getting. I think the city's position here is that if we decided to sell this lot, it would still be sellable and that we would not be penalized by having this easement in place on the back of it. So a buyer would come along and they would search the records and they would find that there's an easement and they would make their judgment on whether it was still a valuable piece of property to them with that easement on it. Councilmember Larson.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand the easement itself. Is the easement for a strip of land or is the easement to place conveyance towers on the land somewhere? What is the actual terms of the easement?
Yeah, so it's really, and I'll pull up this map here, Councilmember Larson, bear with me for 1 second here.
Looks like a strip of land on the drawing, and if it is, how wide is that strip?
So Councilmember Larson, hopefully you can see, I'll zoom in a little bit here, so hopefully this blows up. So really, again, it's for this strip of land. It's located on the back portion of this lot. So really, you would have your underground, you basically would have your power lines running along the back of this property right here. Robert, do you know the width of that right off the top of your head?
I don't, I'm sorry. I can find out and get it to you.
Let me grab it real quick.
I mean, part of the question is, does any maintenance responsibility or anything go in access to that strip of land, part of the easement agreement?
So if you're asking Councilmember Larson, as far as maintenance on the city's end, so we would still own the dirt where the easement lies. So we would, of course, still be on the hook for any maintenance, mowing, any of those kind of things for the property that we still own.
But what about the easement itself underneath the power lines?
Well, again, that any mowing, any of those kind of things, we would still be looking at that piece there. And Robert, correct me if I'm wrong, that'd still be on our end.
It is, yes. We would still be responsible for maintaining it.
If this were privately owned and not city owned, would there be compensation involved?
It's Robert alluded to. It would really be between those two private parties to negotiate that.
Okay.
Depending on what the intended, as Councilmember McIntosh alluded to, that the use and the perceived, benefit to that property there, that will be between those two parties.
I don't see that this encumbers a whole lot. I'm just trying to be clear about what we're giving up in the process of helping out Duke Power meet their mission requirement.
Well, we're also helping the property owner get power to his property.
Exactly.
Service, which
Exactly.
will, if that means they're then going to invest money in that property, that means their property value goes up. That means our tax bill to them goes up. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? All right. Can I get a motion to approve this?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move for approval of C3.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Can I have the clerk take the roll, please?
Councilmember Burke,
Yes.
Councilmember Larson,
Yes.
Councilmember Scipio,
Yes.
Councilmember McIntosh.
Aye. Thank you. That completes our consent agenda. Now we turn to the general agenda. And if I could have the clerk read G1, please.
Item G1, Bicycle Master Plan Priorities Update.
This is an informational item, and who will be presenting this? I'm assuming Matthew Burchick will be doing this. Okay,
That's
Matthew,
correct,
can you walk us through this, please?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and council and committee members. We wanted to provide an update this evening on the Bicycle Master Plan and the projects associated with that, some work that we've done recently, and then what our future goals are with the plan and implementing recommendations from that plan. So before we get into the presentation, I just wanted to talk a little bit about bike planning in general and some of the requirements associated with that. Bike planning is a little bit different from pedestrian planning or planning for automobile travel, and that the needs of the users really weighs in heavily when we're trying to determine where and what kind of facilities we should be installing. So you have some people who ride bikes who are very comfortable riding in traffic, and they may not need the level of infrastructure that others need, while others they prefer or would demand to ride on a separated trail. So not only do we have to figure out where the facilities are needed, we need to determine what types of facilities and determine who the users are for those infrastructure improvements. And clearly then there are going to be cost differences associated with those different infrastructure needs. Developing, designing, and constructing a trail, for instance, is going to be much more expensive than designing and making changes to add bike lanes to a street. That's one example. So as we go through these recommendations, you'll see that it's a mixture of trail recommendations and on-street infrastructure recommendations. And you'll notice some cost differences associated with that. So next slide, please.
And if I may just mention to the committee and other council members, this is an informational item. It's very dense. I highly recommend spending some time with it. It'll be very rewarding. It's a really well put together report. There will be questions, obviously, but feel free to dig in tonight. But let's all make sure that we get up with Matthew if we've got specific questions after this.
Okay. So our current status, we are recognized as a bicycle-friendly community at the bronze level by the League of American Bicyclists. This is the premier community evaluation program that around the country. So the league runs that, and we were first granted this award back in 2013. We renewed that in 2017, and then renewed it again just this past year in 2021. So we're at the bronze level. That's the entry level designation. We can rise to silver, gold, and eventually platinum if we continue on the path we are. So that next slide, the one that you're looking at right now, the current bicycle facilities, this gives you a picture of the infrastructure that's in place right now. You'll notice the greenways in green there. Our bike lanes are dedicated bike lanes in blue, and shared lane markings in pink. What we've tried to do is build a network. So what we don't want to do is just have independent pieces of infrastructure scattered throughout the community. What we want to do is build a network so that people can actually move through the community, using bike lanes, trails, shared lane markings, and connect the destinations that way. So a lot of time has been spent focusing on the improvements, particularly along the Salem Creek Greenway. That's been a spine of the system for a long time. So a lot of the recent trails, the Watchdown Greenway at the Quarry Park, the Brushy Fork Greenway, the Strollway, the Long Branch Trail, these are all connecting to that Salem Creek Greenway. And we've tried to do the same with the on-street infrastructure. So you'll notice a concentration of that, of those on-street improvements in the vicinity of Salem Creek Greenway and those other trails. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see some of the newest infrastructure highlighted there. So these are projects that we have completed over the last year or so. Everything from Hawthorne Road, Academy Street, Stratford Road, Northwest Boulevard, 14th Street, Cleveland Avenue, Trade Street, Old Greensboro Road, and 5th Street. And so we're kind of continuing that network. And you'll see as we're starting to move away from the Salem Creek Greenway and expand the connectivity throughout the community. So the next slide, please. So the Bicycle Master Plan was adopted in 2019, end of 2019. And since then, we've been working on some of those improvements that we just saw on that last slide. A lot of those recommendations those projects were recommendations in the Bicycle Master Plan. But now that we're wrapping up those projects, it was time to move on to the next batch. And this is where our Bicycle Pedestrian Active Mobility Advisory Committee came in. So that committee has been in existence since the end of 2020, so a little over a year that they've been meeting. And one of their early tasks was to create a work program, kind of identifying the tasks that they would like to take on over, it was the first year and a half of their existence. And one of those work program elements was to refine the recommendations in the bicycle master plan. So the bicycle master plan had identified approximately 17 corridors that would be priorities for bicycle infrastructure improvements. What the BPAC, as we call it, wanted to do was refine those recommendations and come up with a manageable list that the city could pursue. So they used the elements of the bicycle master plan, the analyses that were done as part of that plan, and use those criteria in the plan to further refine the recommendations. So you can see there the criteria that they used. 40% of their evaluation dealt with social equity issues. 33% dealt with the latent demand that was there for potential bicycle ridership, and the final 27% had to do with the stress level associated with the streets. And I'll provide a little bit more information on each of those categories. One thing before we go on, I wanted to let you know that Sharon Nelson, the chair of the Bicycle Pedestrian Active Mobility Advisory Committee, has joined us tonight. So just wanted to get her involved with this and make sure that the work of that committee was recognized. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. So I mentioned the criteria. Equity was a major component of the analysis that the BPAC performed. It was a priority for them. And so the bicycle master plan looked at a few different equity criteria in developing recommendations. And one of those was looking at trying to prioritize locations, in this case, low income populations. And the areas that are highlighted here are low income populations, 5% higher than the overall city rate. So these areas have a higher percentage of low income households. So the next slide, please. The other another aspect of the equity analysis was looking at minority populations. So these areas that are highlighted here have minority populations that are 10% higher than the overall city rate. And if we go to the next slide, the areas that are highlighted here have rates of zero vehicle households 10% higher than the overall city rate. So that what we did was look at where the recommendations, the recommended corridors, if they served these areas, their score reflected that, their analysis score. So if we go on to the next slide, the second criteria that I mentioned was the stress level. So as part of the bicycle master plan, we looked at all of the roadways in the community and assigned a stress level rating based on the traffic volumes, the traffic speeds, and the lane widths of those roadways. And this gives you kind of a general impression of where we have streets that might present cyclists with a higher or lower stress level. And clearly, our goal is to lower the stress level of those streets and provide a comfortable environment for people to ride on. So the next slide. This is the final component of the analysis, and it's representing the latent demand. So it demonstrates where we would expect to see the most bicycle ridership, and that's based on the density of schools, parks, greenways, transit stops, population, job density, retail density. This is where we have the destinations that people would be seeking out. So this is the final aspect of that analysis. If we go on to the next slide. So you can see that this table here, the total score, the highest score that a project could receive was 37. The equity component of that made up 15 points of that 37. The latent demand accounted for 12 points. and the stress level score accounted for 10. So what we wound up doing was, breaking the 17 or so corridors into 3 different tiers. And I think this kind of follows how we approach the Greenway plan as well, that any one of these projects in the tier 1 category is going to provide a lot of value to the community. If you go to the next slide, these were the tier 2 projects. So you can see those overall total scores a little bit lower. And if we go to the next slide, the tier 3 projects, you can see those total scores and all the component scores, again, a little bit lower. So the next slide, then we get into some of the specific corridors. And I think we wanted to do just a brief overview of what those corridors look like and what areas they'd be serving, and kind of get to the value of those projects a little bit. So this first corridor is the Forsyth Tech Connector. So connecting Miller Street and Cloverdale commercial area through the Ardmore neighborhood along Miller Street, and finally connecting with Forsyth Tech area. And one thing to note, the southern end of this project near Forsyth Tech would basically intersect with the proposed extension of the Salem Creek Greenway west of where it ends right now at Marketplace Mall. So we're always thinking about how this infrastructure is going to connect with existing and other future planned improvements. The next slide, please. So this is the format of the bicycle master plan. The consultant that we work with broke those corridors into specific segments, and we have information. Please feel free to review this on your own time, and I'm happy to answer questions about it. But there's a lot of detail about the specific segments within those corridors in these tables here. So we have planning level construction cost estimates for each of these corridors. This one was $400,000, and it was primarily, or it was exclusively on-street infrastructure, and it serves really the northwest, west, and southwest wards. So if we go on to the next slide, that next corridor that we looked at, the tier 1 corridor. So these are all the tier 1 corridors from the bicycle master plan. The crosstown connector, this one connects Haynes Park through downtown and east past 52 along 5th Street and connecting to Old Greensboro Road. So if we go to the next slide, you can again see those segments that make up this corridor. And you'll notice that some of this has been completed already. That last segment, number 6, 5th Street from Patterson Avenue to Brushy Fork Trail, Brushy Fork Creek Greenway, that has been completed. That was one of the recent projects that we completed. And you can see a cost estimate there to construct the rest of this corridor. And the next slide. This serves the northwest primarily and the east wards. So if we go on to the next corridor here, the Long Branch Trail. So the existing Long Branch Trail runs from the Salem Creek Greenway. You can see that on the southern end of this corridor and ends at Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. And the next phase of the project would be from Martin Luther King Jr. Drive north to 25th Street. And this, if we go on to the next slide, you can see those different segments, those different segments of this corridor. Next slide, please. So you can see that the southern section has been completed, and that we're looking at moving ahead with the northern section. And this is, I mentioned the cost differential. This is an example of that. You can see the $8.6 million estimate for this. So this is one of those cases where designing, constructing a trail is far more expensive than designing, say, an on-street bike lane on the road. But it also provides greater value in that it provides a separated facility for people who prefer that, and it's a safer environment. One thing to note, last year we applied for a RAISE grant through the US DOT for construction funding for this project. RAISE grant, for those of you who may have not have heard, that is Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity. We were not awarded that grant, but we have the opportunity to reapply this year if we choose to do so. Next slide, please. You can see the Long Branch Trail really serves the East Ward and the Northeast wards. The next corridor is a Forsyth Medical Connector, and it's a longer corridor. It connects, on the eastern end, the old Salem Historic District, along Academy Street and through Ardmore, and connecting to Forsyth Medical Center, and then beyond that to the existing and future expansion of the Little Creek Greenway. So the next slide, please. You can see the progress associated with this. So some of these segments have been completed. So Academy Street, Hawthorne Road, those were recent improvements that we made to the streets. And there's a section of the Little Creek Greenway that is under construction, or we're preparing for construction of that. And again, with the construction cost estimates, you can see the difference in price between constructing trail and constructing those on-street improvements. So next slide, please. And this corridor really serves the south and southwest wards. Okay, the next corridor is the Watchdown Route. So connecting the southeast ward, Watchdown neighborhood, very near Quarry Park and the greenway that runs through Quarry Park, through the South Ward and up towards Haynes Park. So the next slide, please. So some of this, like many of the other corridors, segments of this corridor have been constructed. So the South Main Street bike lane that was installed several years ago is a part of this corridor. And you can see we plan to use Old Salem Road and Brookstown Avenue. So again, this corridor serves the southeast ward, the south, and primarily the northwest wards. And the final corridor of the Tier 1 projects is the Bethabara Brightway. So this really begins at near the Wake Forest campus on Long Drive and extends up Bethabara Road and connects with what would be a future Mill Creek Greenway. One thing to note about this is the Long Drive section of this project. There's a side path there that the city constructed, and that side path has been, it's a separated facility, and it has been extended through the development process so that the city investment in that trail has actually led to private investment by extending that trail through the construction of primarily apartment complexes. So if you go on to the next slide, you'll see the different segments associated with this. Note that the Long Drive section that I just mentioned, that has been completed, and we'd be continuing our work north. And again, the difference in cost between the trail and the on-street infrastructure. You can see that this project would serve the north and northeast wards. So that wraps up the discussion of the Tier 1 projects. I know that was very quick, but I would encourage everybody to take a look at the details associated with those projects, and we can always answer questions if those come up. So the next steps for us with this were to obviously come here tonight and share an update on where we stand with our infrastructure improvements and the next steps. The next step after that then would be to actually design some of those Tier 1 on-street projects using 2018 bond funding. So we're estimating that to hire a consultant to help us with those design preparations, about $400,000. Once we had those designs in place, we would be able to establish a construction budget. We'd have a much better idea of what those facility improvements would actually cost at that point. We'd establish the construction budget at that point and then move on to construction. So again, thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Matthew. Have I got questions from the committee or from council members? It's a lot to take in. Matthew, I do want to say thank you to you and staff and also to BPAC. I know the amount of effort that went into this was pretty significant, and we greatly value the look that you guys give us into what's possible and what we think the community would like to see. And do I have questions? Yes, Councilmember Larson. And then Councilmember Scipio and then Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Matthew, for an update. Very useful. I do have one question, though, particularly is it seems to be noticeably absent is the multi-use pathway. Doesn't seem to show up in your planning documents. Does this predate all of that, or what? I mean, it's a major east-west connector from the hospital.
Yes, sir. Yeah. You're correct about that. So that one is funded, and we are in the design process with that. So it may have been mentioned in the plan. I believe it was, but the discussion tonight was really about the next steps, and the next steps with the multi-use path along Salem Parkway is really design and construction, and we're prepared to move ahead with that. So
I think it's important.
While we didn't mention it specifically tonight, it certainly is in the works.
Certainly worth mentioning, and because it doesn't show up on your mapping, I think it deserves some verbal attention for one thing.
Certainly.
Second matter is that you have you're showing in your Tier 1 north-south, your Watchdown through Old Salem. Is it your opinion then that the strollway is not acceptable for bike traffic?
So I think this gets to the discussion that I raised at the top of the presentation about the needs of different users. So I think the strollway is great, and it serves a type of user who feels more comfortable on a separated facility. But for cyclists who may want to go 20, 25 miles per hour, that's not a compatible speed with the other uses on the strollway. So in that case, those users who want to travel at a faster speed may be better off on the road. So it's balancing the needs of those different users.
So looking at the hierarchy of sort of bike paths and whatever, is it sort of a destination-based priority versus a recreational priority? And I don't know whether there's a way to differentiate that. Clearly, the strollway is a recreational activity, seemingly, or should be maybe more recreational, and then the bypass should be more destination-based traffic. Is that what we're thinking here?
That's one way to look at it. I think, I would also look at it in terms of the users. So some cyclists, I know I use the strollway as a cyclist, and I'll have a trailer with my son in it. So we're going at a slower speed that's compatible with other users on that trail, where, somebody on a bike who wants to get somewhere quicker, who wants to travel faster, the strollway may not be their ideal transportation route. Then maybe the road is more suitable for their intended speed.
We have guidelines as to speeds on our greenways and strollways for our bike traffic.
We don't have speed limits. What we always say is, the cyclists need to yield to pedestrians in those situations, yield to the slower user, and announce when they're going to be passing. So
Right.
It's more of a courtesy and trying to build that culture of courtesy on the trails.
Great, thank you very much.
Councilmember Scipio.
Yes, thank you. This is always so interesting to see these wonderful plans we have. So, Matthew, I have two questions. One is on funding. Have we appropriated money to be able to do Tier 1?
For the design of Tier 1, is that?
To create Tier 1, construction, design, construction.
No, I don't believe so. We don't have the funding to construct all of those projects.
Okay.
No, ma'am.
So, all right. So, my other question is, as we plan all of this bicycling, have we thought about or put in a plan to monitor the use of the different lanes that are, so that we know that not only were they created, but they are actually being used. And secondly, are we going to be doing anything to encourage the use of the different lanes as we construct them?
Yes, ma'am. So the answer to your first question, to a limited extent, yes. So we have permanent bicycle and pedestrian counters at different locations throughout the community. So we are assessing the use. Now those locations are somewhat limited. We have counters on the Strollway, actually, at Salem Lake, on West End Boulevard, and one or two other locations. So we're a part of NCDOT's bicycle and pedestrian counting program, and that's all managed through that program. So we're counting in those locations. I think one thing we could do is purchase portable counters that we could move to different locations as we build bike lanes. We could count that location for a short term and figure out how people are using it, and if people are using it. So we could expand that program in that sense. And then your second question, as far as encouraging, I think that's, we're talking about the Bicycle Pedestrian Active Mobility Advisory Committee. That's another one of their priorities, actually, is the education and encouragement to get people out, encourage them to use the infrastructure that we do have, and make that transportation choice.
I'm thinking that it might be a great opportunity if we can encourage people to use bicycling as a wellness issue, and perhaps as the city of the arts, innovation, and wellness, perhaps our major hospital healthcare systems could partner with us in trying to create more cycling as a wellness benefit.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I certainly agree with that. And, one of our partners, we're part of the Safe Kids Coalition, which is run out of Baptist Medical Center. And Joshua Swift is actually one of the members of our Bicycle Pedestrian Active Mobility Advisory Committee. So we're certainly looking at trying to tie in the health benefits with these active transportation options.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Matthew, could you touch on the role that the Transportation Advisory Committee has with these plans, and maybe even some money, maybe?
Certainly, yeah. Yes, ma'am. So I think once we have designs, we talked about moving to the design stage with some of these on-street bicycle infrastructure improvements. When we get to that point of having those designs and having cost estimates in place, that would be a great opportunity then to take these projects to the MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and try to seek approval from the TAC for those funds, and use federal funding to help offset the expenses associated with that infrastructure. One example specifically from the corridors we looked at is the Long Branch Trail. And the MPO actually approved nearly $1 million for design of the Long Branch Trail, that next phase of it between Martin Luther King Jr. Drive and 25th Street. So where those opportunities come up, we would certainly like to take advantage of them.
And that's something that we need to keep in mind when we're talking to Leslie Mazingo to look for money when it's available at the national level. She's excellent at that. So let's all remind her that this is a priority for us. Okay, this is an information items. Are there any more questions? Again, this is deep, and there's a lot more information here. So I encourage everybody to dig in and contact Matthew directly. But there is no action needed from this committee on this item at this point in time. Matthew, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, item G2, please.
Item G2, consideration of items relating to golf carts.
All right, who will be taking this one? Is this Aaron? Is this you?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and get this one started. This is not usually the forum I talk about golf carts in, but so we got a request from Wake Forest, or I guess Atrium Wake Forest Baptist Health. They've got a pretty substantial construction project going on at their campus, and it impacts their access to public streets and some of the logistics on their campus. So they reached out to staff to inquire about the possibility of using golf carts to transport patients, staff, supplies, etc. While this is going on, and there would be a need to have those golf carts on public streets during the time this construction project was going in place. So city attorney's office helped put together some language here. And so what you've got in front of you are really two pieces of this. There's a very short amendment to Chapter 78. That's existing language that's in the city code. And basically that's the section for golf carts in there. It's pretty small stuff in that section. That's just kind of cleaning that up so that you don't have any conflicts with what the second piece is, which is some new language, a lot of new language that's going into Chapter 74. And that's your section on streets and sidewalks. And I'll just kind of run through some of these provisions at a very, very high level. If you're looking through that ordinance language, it lays out the purpose and gives you some definitions. I'll call your attention to the definition of a golf cart. It mentions it's a gas-powered or electric vehicle designed or manufactured for operation on a golf course for sporting and recreational purposes and not capable of exceeding 20 miles per hour. So there's some clear limitations there. The other thing is it also lays out provisions there for golf carts may be operated on public streets. Basically, you got to be on streets with speed limits of less than 35 miles per hour. In the central business district or central industrial district, those are your two main zoning districts downtown, where it's 35, where it's already covered in Chapter 78. Number two is really kind of the circumstance we're looking at this evening is when operated on behalf or by a hospital to or from the primary campus, basically to those accessory uses associated with the hospital. Three is your example when driven directly across the street from one part of a golf course to another. So think Reynolds Park, when you play holes 1 through 3, you've got to cross over Reynolds Park Boulevard to get to the balance of the golf course. That's what number 3 is. And then number 4, really operated in conjunction with a special event permit. Section 515 kind of lays forth your standards, your rules and regulations. So these golf carts need to have headlights and turn signals and things of that nature. The other thing I would note on there again is really the caveat that you can't have these golf carts operated on streets with speed limits greater than 35 miles per hour. Flipping back over, the other kind of main provision there is we did want to include some standards to have signage on these golf carts so it's clear to the public and any law enforcement that these are not folks just simply going on a joyride, that these are affiliated and associated with hospital uses. So there will be some signage on there to make that clear. That is a really, really quick summary. We kind of put this language together. We did have a chance to vet this with the folks from Atrium Wake Forest Baptist, and I think they're generally comfortable with these standards. And again, I would share with you, this is not just for Wake Forest Baptist, but should Novant need something like this down in the future, this would extend to them as well. So it's hospitals there. That is a very, very high level summary. I'm glad to answer any questions. And I know we've got Christina Rhodes here from Atrium Wake Forest Baptist Health, if you've got any questions for her. And I also defer to Angela if she's got anything to add on or share in relation to this item.
I don't have anything to add. Jerry Contos is here as well from my staff.
Yep.
Okay, have I got questions from committee members or council members? Councilmember Mundy, whose ward this is in, is not with us this evening. He had a conflict, but we've spoken on this, and he is in agreement with or would approve of this as well. Councilmember Larson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Are these vehicles licensed by DOT? Are these licensed vehicles? Are they required to meet any state licensing requirements for motor vehicle use on highways, state highways, local highways, what have you?
No, it's really those standards set forth in 515 there, Councilmember Larson, and we tried to build in some standards again. So they've got headlights, brake lights, turn signals, seat belts for passengers, things of that nature. Those are the standards they would have to follow, but they're not they're not going through that DOT process.
So they don't carry a North Carolina license plate.
No.
So where's that list on that on this document about rear view mirrors, windshield wipers, those sorts of issues? Where is that?
It's section 74-515 rules and regulations, letter A.
Letter A. Oh, must be equipped with headlights. I see it.
Councilmember Scipio.
Yes, I understand that Atrium has asked for this because of the construction on their campus. So would this apply, or would it fit for Winston-Salem State or the School of the Arts or Wake Forest University's main campus if they have golf carts that go around the campus but have to then cross one of our major streets? And like MLK, going from the main campus to the Anderson Center, or across Walltown, or one of the other streets where the School of the Arts goes across to another building that's not on their main campus, or at Salem College, where they may have a golf cart that goes from the campus over to their athletic fields. Would what they currently have and using golf carts need to fall under this if they cross a major street, or are they okay the way it is? Because if not, I would say, can we add to them institutions of higher learning, or for SciTech going across Miller Street or anything like that?
So Councilmember Scipio, I think the short answer is I don't think this language, when you look at 74-514 and it lays out the four kind of carve outs for where this is currently allowed, I don't see where what you described is allowed in what's stated there. What I would say is, you know, if you're thinking of a college campus, a university campus, if somebody's using golf carts on their private property and they're not going on public streets, I would assume they can do that now. If they're taking somebody from a dining hall to a residence hall or giving somebody a tour on their private property, they can absolutely do that. If they want to get those golf carts out on the public streets, I would assume that we would need to add a number 5 in that section under 74-514 to allow a carve out for that. I'm not saying we can't, Councilmember Scipio. I would just caution to say that may be something we would want to come back and revisit at a different time, because I think, you know, as we thought about this, we were trying to be pretty strategic and kind of what we were targeting this city code amendment. And I think with the 2 hospitals that we have, we felt pretty clearly with the street layout around those, we kind of had a good handle on what that was. When you start thinking about the colleges, the universities, those types of uses, we've got more of those. They're in different settings. And I think we would want to look at that a little bit further and see if that is something that makes sense, or if we need some different rules or carve outs if we were going to explore something like that. And I see Angela's unmuted as well.
If I may, I think Aaron's assessment is correct. It's not permitted in the language that you have before you. And I think we probably need more time to study that and see what streets we're talking about and whether or not it's appropriate to go from thinking of WSSU from one street to another street with the golf cart. I just think we need to look more carefully at those streets, and that's going to take a little bit more time. And we can certainly do that, but it would not be covered by this proposed amendment.
And Councilmember Scipio, to add on to that, I'm sorry, to add on to that real quick. I know the folks at Atrium Wake Forest were a little bit pressed for time on this, and so we were hustling to get this pulled together. So I know there are some time constraints on their end.
So I just think that that might be something that we need to explore, because I can see a need there in the future if we have this, make this ordinance public. And my second question is, do this same kind of ordinance exist in our peer cities, and have we checked with them at all?
There are some of cities, I guess some of the cities closer to the coast, I believe, the beach area that have golf carts, that allow golf carts. But in terms of the cities around us, I don't recall any having a golf cart ordinance. Doesn't mean they don't have one, but I just don't recall off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Councilmember Larson.
Yes, I mean, I think we need to look carefully at this for other institutions. I know, for example, Old Salem has used golf carts for maintenance purposes, running up and down rather than running a full vehicle, pickup truck or whatever, to be able to move crews around. I suspect colleges do the same thing. I don't know if Pathabra, for example, that historic district that has a road running through the middle of its campus, is dealing with golf carts, but I could easily see how they'd be used logistically for their support and operations. So for a college like Winston-Salem State or for Salem College, for example, which is basically in a tourist attraction area, I think there's some deliberation. Also, the other thing that I remember, and some of you may have seen it as well, there was an individual for years who used to go to Cloverdale every morning for breakfast, who had a golf cart and there's signal on it and had signs on it and everything. And he was sort of a feature that we used to all admire and support. And I would hate for us to start writing him up for tickets for riding his golf cart down to a Cloverdale kitchen. So I think there's a little thought that needs to be given to this. I'm all for it. I think golf carts are an alternate, like scooters or other things we've talked about, are an opportunity, whether they go on greenways, for example, if you want to go on the strollway. I think we're going to look at this fairly comprehensively. I think if we're going to go ahead and pass something to facilitate the hospitals and they feel an immediate need, it's really a matter of enforcement, if anything else. And we can come back and then revisit it, but I don't think it's ready to go the way it is right now.
Okay, I would say that this is a change to an existing ordinance that we have, and that there is nothing precluding us from making additional changes if we want to add other areas. I would propose moving this forward as is, because it speaks to a specific use case that has been fairly well sussed out by both legal staff and inspections or planning. So I know this is a time-sensitive issue for Baptist. If we don't have specific problems with this change, my recommendation is that we move it forward. If there are specific things in here that need to be changed, then that's another matter. We can always come back and add to it. So curious how everybody else feels.
Mr. Chairman, due respect, but I think if we're going to do this tonight, then I think we need to eliminate the historic district from this, as well as college campuses. Anything zoned as campus.
It's not fair.
Anything that's zoned as a historic district, which uses already using these cards, ought to be excluded from this ordinance.
Okay, I don't understand.
Anything that's zoned campus is within a campus zoning category.
So let me offer a little clarification, Councilmember Larson. What we're talking about are really 4 instances: central business, central industrial district, that is the core of downtown Winston-Salem, operated by or behalf on behalf of a hospital from the primary campus to the surrounding parcels that support that. When driven directly across the street from one part of a golf course to another, or in conjunction with a special use permit. Those are the 4 buckets where this provision could be used, not campuses, not other things. Those are it.
That's the
what's in
problem.
the language.
That's the problem. It's preferential to the hospitals at the cost of the university and campuses. Is that not true? It excludes other universities and campuses from enjoying the same benefits of having a golf cart service ability.
Again, Councilmember Larson, I think what staff would say and recommend is we tried to address the very specific need that was before us. And I think this language does that. I don't think we're saying that if it's the preference of this committee and council to come back and look at other options, that can be done at a future date. And I think that's something we can have a conversation about. But just because action is sought on this matter doesn't preclude that from happening.
Well, they opened up the box. We've opened up the box, and now let's fill it up. So if we can approve this tonight, I want to see something come back from to council, which is a modification of this. That respects equality within the university systems. Whether it be Wake Forest, whether it be Winston-Salem State, whether it be Salem College. If you have a campus zoning, every bit as valuable, I think, as hospital zoning.
And I think we understand that, Councilmember Larson. I think we just need to evaluate the streets and the impact of such an ordinance on those streets and how we navigate those streets in light of golf carts and so forth. Because some of the streets may or may not be problematic, but we just need time to study those like we studied the streets and so forth in the areas we're talking about around the hospital. So we are happy to do that. We just can't make that decision tonight without being better informed. But we are committed to coming back with an item if this committee wants us to, that looks at the campuses, the educational institutions.
So I would recommend approval of that item on for us tonight with a caveat, staff review the possibility of using campus zoning as a criteria for the availability of using these golf carts within those zoning categories.
Sure.
Or historic district, H zoning and campus zoning. Those seem to be the two most applicable.
Okay, is that in the form of a motion?
Yes, sir, it is in form of a motion.
Great. Can I get a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Can we get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Burke,
Yes.
Councilmember Larson,
Yes.
Councilmember Scipio,
Yes.
Councilmember McIntosh.
Aye.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
if the city clerk will correct that, Mrs. Councilmember Burke seconded that motion, not me.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
Mhm.
Okay, that ends our scheduled agenda. I did want to just make a kind of an announcement here, PSA, to the public. I think most council members are aware of this, but the number of questions and concerns about the Weaver fire have been heard loud and clear by council. I think as we move forward, we will be deciding which of our committees will be dealing directly with ordinance changes that will prevent and deal with the issues that we saw coming from this. Just like Chief Mayo said, there's not a department in the city that didn't deal with the fire during the emergency. I feel like the same thing is going to be the case as we move forward. So I ask for the public's patience. This is going to take a little bit of time. We want to, as Councilmember Taylor always says, we want to measure twice, cut once. And so therefore I would ask again, a little patience as we put together and ask staff to do their best work and to give them a little breathing room in order to do that. So again, that's a little soapbox there. That's my PSA. Any other comments from committee? Very good. Okay. Thank you, folks. I think this was a productive evening and we wish you the best and we'll see you next Monday night.
Thank you.